My guest today for Pavement Week is Alex Ross Perry. Alex is a filmmaker and actor, best known for his films Listen Up, Philip, and Her Smell, starring Elizabeth Moss. His latest film, Pavements, is part documentary, a pavement jukebox musical, a fake biopic, and a look at the Pavement Museum. It premiered at the 81st Venice International Film Festival and will start being released nationwide in May. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Alex Ross Perry. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm very excited to talk to you about Pavements, but I also need to tell you, I owned an independent video store for 22 years in Portland, Oregon. And when I was on tour with Guided by Voices, they would go out and drink or go to record stores. I would go to Kim's and I would get films to bring home to basically help my identity of the store. You worked at Kim's, correct?
I did, yeah. All of 2005, 6, and 7.
And you have a documentary coming out about video stores, correct?
I do. And certainly if we start talking about that, that's the end of what we came here to talk about.
I know. But I'm fascinated because Kim's, to me, was like the only video store I would go out of my way to visit. And I just wanted to know how that experience framed anything that you went into afterwards.
Yeah, it was really exciting. When I moved to New York to attend film school at NYU, the store became extremely important to me as a customer. So about 2 years later, when I finally was able to get a job there after asking weekly for a year and a half, yes, the who's who of customers was very exciting. But for me, the real celebrities in the store were the employees always.
Yes.
This is who I'm impressed by. This is what I want to do. And in this film, Pavements, producer, editor Robert Green was an employee there. And in many ways, the time I spent there and the connections continue to be extremely meaningful to me in a way that I couldn't say the same about film school at all. Because, if you were in charge of one, best case scenario is that the store becomes a nexus point for the community. And in East Village, New York City, that's a big community. That's not a town. That's not a small city.
Right.
So the community of us and, penniless employees getting paid in cash and the customers, local East Village maniacs and traveling luminaries like yourself and everything in the middle, was just really a bizarre thing that really, we were at the end of it there. And while I'm eager to hear about your video store life, again, we would be here all day. Perhaps when video heaven is its way to you, we'll have a subsequent conversation.
That's brilliant. Because I would go in, I would just vibrate because I'd be like, oh my God, I've heard about this. And I can take it home because you had an amazing section of things that were for sale. Oh my God, it was amazing.
What are some recollections that you remember? Like, now I get to have this, or now I get to even bring it back to our store and give it to our customers.
A lot of bootleg Fassbender stuff, like
Sure.
being like, oh, I have some things like from Facets and other companies, but and also just weird music bootlegs, like getting Guitar Wolf's Wild Zero film there on like a bootleg VHS. All these things, it was just visceral. And I would, and the great thing about it was because I had a business, it felt like I wasn't spending my own money collecting this stuff. I would just go in and just leave with bags of films to just take home and share with people. And it was fantastic. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, it's very exciting, but also there's a clear transition point of what you just mentioned for Pavements, which is you mentioned the music bootlegs. You mentioned that, and what I've been doing for about 3 years now with former employees, primarily Sean Williams, who I worked with, is the rental collection has returned to New York, and we've been re-inventorying it and recataloging it and making it available to people at the Lower Manhattan Alamo Draft House.
Wow.
And we're only prioritizing, there's 40,000 videotapes. We have put out about 5,000. What we've prioritized is the stuff that made the store special, obviously. Tens of thousands of those were just the things you could get anywhere, even in a Blockbuster. But that music selection, we've put out every single music tape we found whether it's something that's kind of available, but there are not great Blu-rays of every CBS Fox concert film, of Stevie Nicks concert film, of a Kate Bush concert film. Those are maybe on YouTube, maybe they're just from the tape. And then there's all these compilations of just live performances that are dreadful quality, but people don't remember or they don't even know. That was it. If you wanted to see live footage of Joy Division
Right.
in 1995, you had to find a Kim's or maybe a Your Store and get that bootleg tape, because there's no other place in the world you could see video footage of that band performing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a great store would have that bootleg. And we've had a lot of fun with that, which sort of dovetails into this movie, which is like, we've seen in our lifetime such a change in the way that music is commodified, accessed, packaged, and sold. And at the time that you're shopping for your store, that Kim's was building up that selection, the commodification of music was incredibly small. It was probably limited to tapes, records, and CDs, and with extremely limited exceptions, maybe like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. Official movies. And of course, in the 90s, there's the video album, right, which a lot of like rock bands would have. But there's really no way to access the music as a moving image or as anything other than a CD and a concert. And that is something that people, right now on YouTube, you could call up the name of a band. You'd have enough material to watch just on YouTube to keep you busy for a year of any notable band that's been around as long as yourself, Pavement, whatever. And that's just not what it was. And the movie needed to be about that era as much as it needed to be about this band. And to me, that was the challenge, because that era is when I grew up and it was fascinating. And I remember going to Repo Records in Philadelphia, both the one in Bryn Mawr and then the one on South Street. And they would have some of those bootlegs. And I would get an Operation Ivy bootleg of a band I was obsessed with that had broken up, 7 years before I ever heard of them.
Right.
And that felt like a miracle. There was just no
Absolutely.
world where I thought that would ever be a thing. And it's behind the counter. It's probably $30 for a dub. But this movie needed to be about the decade that Pavement were initially active, 89 to 99, and what music was in those 10 years, how people accessed it, how they thought about it, how they packaged it, how they sold it, and how the artists grappled with all of that.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because a lot of the film is about things that come after 1999 in terms of music. I mean, jukebox musicals, a museum dedicated to a band, a biopic about a band. That's all kind of relatively new things for something that were as, it's weird to say quaint, but it is kind of mind blowing to realize how big Pavement seemed in my head, but really quite small scale globally in terms of reach at the time they were around. So it's really a fascinating film. But like, how did you get attached to make this film? Like, who came to you? Was it after you'd done the video with Pavement, the Harness Your Hopes?
No, that was extremely in the middle of the process, and that was sort of viewed as a canary in a coal mine or a weather balloon, or really it was day one of the movie in a way.
Okay.
The process started summer 2020. The band was kind of sitting on their hands because Primavera and the other slanted and enchanted 30th anniversary celebrations were curtailed by the pandemic. How long films producers Chris Lombardi and Gerard Cosloy at Matador had been thinking, at some point down the line, we need to do something else with Pavement that is a product other than a deluxe edition. How long they'd been thinking, maybe we do a movie, maybe we do something. I don't know. Could have been 1 month. It could have been 5 years. But for whatever reason, they started taking that very seriously. And they found producers that they liked, primarily Danny Gabay of Vice Films, now Pulse Films, and Peter Klein of All Day, Every Day. And those guys were kind of trusted to build the movie. And Peter and Danny specifically called me, and I'd known Danny a little, and he said, There's the notion of a Pavement movie. I know two things. It can't be cookie cutter. They want anything but just one of those music docs. And they think that the best approach to it is not hiring a documentary filmmaker or a music documentarian, but a screenwriter, someone who would approach this film as a story, as a written object rather than as a document. And two, Stephen Malkmus strikes me as a fictional character in one of your movies. Exact kind of personality type, level of brilliance, level of humor that you have written several times over. Would you be interested in this? Are you a fan? And I was, and I had missed seeing them in the 90s, despite being glued to Philadelphia alternative rock radio and knowing the music well. I saw them in 2010 during the first reunion. And then, other than just really getting into Malkmus's persona in the 2010s as an interview subject, I hadn't thought about them that much. They felt inactive. They felt finished. Like that reunion tour was a coda, not an ellipses. So
Absolutely.
when it seemed like it was actually a bridge to another moment in the band and that they were looking to do something atypical, it was just kind of building from there. And all of 2020 was spent on the phone, researching, interviewing everybody. And by the time I started the interviews, I had jars for the movie. I had a musical jar. I had a museum jar. And from the beginning, I had a cliche biopic jar. And I said, if your story was told through objects, what would those objects be? Who has them? Do they still exist? And I said, what a screenwriter would say if you were interviewing a subject with the intention of writing the flattest, most cliche version of their life. What was the hardest day? What was the hardest month? What was the biggest tension at any point? Tell me those stories. And you talk to 6, 7, 8, 9 people, you hear the same story 6, 7, 8, 9 times, but you hear different perspectives on it. Then you talk to Malkmus, and his story is different than everybody else's, and that
Sure.
complicates the matter in a very compelling way. And the movie just kind of developed in that manner. And 2021 was really all about raising money and figuring out how can we do this, right? The intention now is a meal with nothing but entrees.
Okay.
We don't get any shortcuts. We are fully immersing ourselves in whenever this reunion moment happens, we're there. That's a little bit easy. We're also going to stage a musical on stage in New York. That's not easy. We're going to do Hollywood casting to create a biopic such as we would see getting released every fall, winning awards. That's not going to be easy. And then kind of in the middle of that, knowing by late 2021 that these rehearsals were actually going to happen in spring 2022. Let's do a Harness Your Hopes video. It's going to be on the deluxe edition of Terror Twilight that we're finally putting out after all these years. The song's success had occurred entirely within our life cycle of working on this.
Right.
It actually curtailed many of my ideas because I had all these wonky ideas about Pavement conspiratorially leaving clues in their music and in their videos, letting people know we'll be back in 20 years, in 10 years, and then we'll be bigger than ever. Because the great question I found from talking to everybody was, could this band have been bigger than they were? Could they have been the band that you thought they were in your heart, that their biggest fans thought they were, that Robert Greene thought they were? Could they have literally been the band that captured that moment? And everybody said, yes, they could have. And they maybe should have, but it just was never going to happen. And then my joke was, so it'll happen in the movie. But then it kind of happened in real life.
Yes.
So then the movie had to adapt to that. And then Harness Your Hope's success, even making that video, was not something that would have been predictable when I was researching and outlining, but something that the movie then was not only dealing with, the movie was about that.
I know the guys in Pavement, but I also feel like they're like a very mysterious, guarded bunch of people as a unit.
Well, what do you mean when you say they're mysterious?
Well, I just mean like you could love Pavement, but you wouldn't necessarily know like anything about Spiral Stairs' life, like what he did before this, what he does during his day, where he lives currently.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you were in the community at that time, so like to me, what you just said is my memory of everything at that time, which is you don't know anything about anybody. Like you don't know what this guy's life is like because you don't follow him on Instagram and he doesn't post anything. They
Right.
emerge every 2 years in a brief publicity cycle in the
Exactly.
pages of Spin. You see them at the concert. You don't think about them at all. The only people you'd think about would be people who are being covered in the mainstream press, Rivers Cuomo,
Right.
or somebody whose mystery and charisma and brilliance burns bright, like Malkmus. And you would have to really think hard about what this guy's deal is. But there would be no information. There would be no public facing side of that except for the work. And that is fine. That is, to me, again, you could tell me you're completely wrong, but like that's how I remember everything in growing up in the 90s. And even in the 2000s, like you see the emergence of, maybe not inheritors to what they were doing, but certainly in a lineage, somebody like Connor Oberst, like he's kind of charismatic, mysterious, tortured, but like just absurdly prodigious young musicians that take up the Malkmus mantle when he kind of transitions into like elder statesman mode with his later work. And the band to me, it's that ordinariness that is very compelling. And we explore this in the film. They say, coming from Stockton, California, the Cleveland of California, extremely drab, suburban, middle class nothingness. There is no torment. There is no escaping the slums. There is no escaping your father's mansion. It's middle class nothingness. And they emerge from that as preppies who maybe want to wear slacks, maybe want to wear corduroys or chinos, and just be music nerds. And that completely average working class mentality that the band early on really seemed proud of. Over a life cycle, it creates two things. One, it's just kind of not literally because who's lucky as artists who get to do what they love for a living, but like it's a working class group of guys. Like you look at the 28 years since the band. Yes, Mark was in Sonic Youth. Everyone in New York knows Mark as a prolific bartender.
Yes, that's right. No. Yeah.
Steve West works as a mason. These are blue collar working class professions, and these are guys who are extremely comfortable. Bob works in horse racing. These are guys who are extremely comfortable working like that, and that's fascinating. It's not dramatically fascinating
Right.
for the sake of a film. It creates this bizarre tension at the end of the day when you're trying to show, let's be honest, iconic musicians in their own world. A long portrait of themselves that you're working to get their feedback and edit down from the initial 3 hour cut to what we have now, which is 2 hours, 5 minutes. They don't see themselves as iconic, significant, important, worthy of portraiture, compelling, tormented, fascinating, contradictory. They see themselves as guys who started playing some music with friends in 1989, 90, 91, 92, and just kind of never stopped, even though they did stop for a couple years at a time here and there. And they really see themselves that way. And it's an extreme sense of modesty that's very strange and very unique. But it gets into their restrictions of the movie, which were, well, we're not really that important or interesting. We don't want to be in it. We certainly don't want to do interviews, sit down and talk about it on camera. We'll talk to you, but like, we really don't want to do that much because like, we're not X band or Y band. Like we don't matter in that sense. And me and Robert all along were like, okay, but you do to your fans, certainly. But okay, we'll play along. Like, let's pretend that you're not important and you're not interesting and this band is not meaningful in a way that everybody but you guys seems to have fun with it being.
Yeah.
Let's just see what happens. And I was very respectful of the fact that from the very beginning, there was an extreme reluctance for them to over involve themselves with the filmmaking. Not because they said we don't approve of making a movie. They wanted the movie. They just don't want to have to make a movie. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. But
It's
they
perfect.
didn't want to have to really do a lot of work because they were beginning to feel like perhaps this next moment, this next tour, this might be the thing that fully enshrines us in a way that we admitted to you in 2020 when we hadn't seen each other in a decade. We all kind of feel like there's something unfulfilled. And certainly the signs were in the air that like this is going to be the fulfillment of that. Who wants to be distracted with like, and I still need to sit down with Alex and do my fourth interview?
Right.
And I get that. And we said we can work with that. And that gave me the freedom to create a structure that was using that as my MO rather than grappling with what to do about that. And certainly they let us into the rehearsal and we spent, a few weeks off and on watching them create this sound again. And I said, let us tag along when you do 4 sold out shows in New York. If I could get you guys for as little as 2, as many as 4 hours to come to the museum, I need that. That might be it.
Right.
That might be all I need. And then later the opportunity was there to get them to come and participate in a phony baloney Q&A for the fake movie that doesn't exist. I said, give me like 2 more hours. And then the movie, they're all over the movie, but certainly, we heard from more than one person, like, we're in this too much. I thought this was supposed to be about all these other things.
Oh,
Okay.
right. Well, it was so funny when I talked to Spiral this week about the film. I asked about the biopic. He was like, even though it's fake, he's like, it cut really close to the bone for him. Like he felt it. He's like, it was kind of real. So you're doing these things that they take a lot of energy, like casting, directing, doing music scoring for a jukebox musical. Like, were you doing these all at the same time, or were you like, this is the time we're doing the musical, and now we'll move over here? Like, did you know it was going to be like a kaleidoscopic affair with all these elements coming in?
That was the intention from the very beginning.
Okay.
I've looked at kaleidoscopes my whole life. I couldn't tell you how they're made.
Sure, me either.
And this was no different. I guess I remember in elementary school wrapping some cellophane around a roll of toilet paper and making a kaleidoscope. But beyond that, the intention was always kaleidoscopic because I said, okay, you guys don't want to be in it as much. All right, well, let me film you while you rehearse. But we need to sort of tell the story of the music, what that music is, but we need to present it in a way that it makes sense to someone who has never listened to a band. You've been listening to this band for 30 years. You're saying, I'm hearing this music differently. And that became a musical. That is a way to do that, as well as grappling with the things I say on camera in the movie, in character as the theater director. What would happen if you took a painfully sincere medium of musical theater where everyone there has been working since they were 10 years old to sing and dance, and you give them lyrics, songs, melodies that since 1989 have been regarded as jangly, laid back, slacker, ironic, sarcastic joke. What happens when you mix oil and vinegar? And the kaleidoscope was part of it. Casting the biopic with the famous actors and putting that on, that was always part of it, as a way of understanding the story, as a way of broadening the scope of the story. But like I said, 5 entrees, no side dishes. But the movie's premise posits that all of these things are happening at the same time. It posits in the year 2022, the band reunites, they have a musical, the museum opens, and they're making a movie. Now, 3 of those things did happen. They did reunite, they did tour. We did do the museum in September, maybe the first week of October 2022, coinciding with the early days of the tour. We had not finished raising money for the movie. We only had so much in the bank, but we had enough. So we said, momentum is there, the crew is working. Let's go right into the musical. Let's just knock the musical out. I had written it. Keegan DeWitt and Dabney Morris had been arranging it. We knew that we needed the musical has 9 parts, 9 pieces of music that are all medleys, ranging from 3 to 12 minutes. We knew that we needed those done. We knew that before we started, we needed the music essentially finished. And we said, let's just do it. And we finished the museum early October. Maybe a week later, we had auditions for the musical. And then the biopic was just always contingent on when is Joe Keery free? When
Okay.
does he have a week? We need 6 days. When is he going to be free? Whenever he's free, we'll be ready to go. Then we heard, okay, he'll be free at this point.
I just have a quick question about Joe. Was he
Yeah.
always going to be your Malkmus?
Yeah, my suggestion from day one was, and they'll be a pretty rotten, cliche-ridden Hollywood dime a dozen biopic where Joe Keery plays Stephen Malkmus. I had met him once.
Okay.
We had professed the desire to maybe do something. So this wasn't like a pipe dream of like, if only I could get to him. It's like, I have his number. We'll figure this out when the time comes.
Okay.
I think he'd be into this from the we talked about. At the time I was telling everyone this, he was much less known as a musician than he is now, 5 years later. But I knew that he had it in him. And, at the time, if you Googled him plus guitar, you got much fewer images than you would today.
Yes.
But there were some pictures where I showed one to Chris Lombardi, and Chris said, "Is that Steve?" I said, "No, that's Joe." And
Chris.
and I just felt like it had to be that. So we were always waiting for
Right.
his schedule. Then when his schedule opened up, we didn't have the money because we had spent it all. So we had to get the rest very quickly, and it changed what we were going to be filming tremendously. But part of the adaptability of the entire project, nothing that changes not at all is interesting. That would be very boring. Also because I never worked in anything resembling nonfiction in this way, nor had I ever made something spread out over 2 years of kind of active work.
Right.
Filming the rehearsals of the band in Portland Bank, and then realizing that in a way that story kind of ends when they take the stage again, showed me that for our movie, the process was the text. We're not making a concert movie. We are always saying that. So we need the rehearsals. So then when it came time to do the musical, it was like, I'd always kind of thought we would just have a musical in the movie. But now I know the process is the text, and I want to see that. I want to see rehearsals. I want to see auditions.
Sure.
I want to equate this journey with the band's journey. We had done the museum already, and again, it's much simpler, but I had known that the process of getting to we're here at the ribbon cutting, that's not all we need. We need other little bits so that when you get there, it feels like we've followed this idea. And then by the time we shot the biopic a year and a half later, I was like, now originally we were just going to shoot all 45 pages of this.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We don't have the money for that. We can shoot 20. But I know now a table read, wardrobe fitting, Joe working with a vocal coach, Joe getting into character, Joe going to the Whitney. That is the text. That is,
yeah.
If this one part of the movie lacks that element, it will feel imbalanced. So the whole thing grew very organically, but also, we never shot for more than, a few days at a time.
Okay.
And that was kind of refreshing for me because you're making a movie every day. I'm looking for the moments for the overall arc, but we're filming 100 hours of footage for a 2-hour movie. We don't have that shot yet. You're just kind of just going, and then we'll deal with it later. And, for the musical rehearsals, we have them 5 days a week. We only film 2 days a week. So you're making a movie, but 60% of the time, there's no camera. This to me is like the ultimate dream of filmmaking. It's like everything but the thing that makes the most sense.
Absolutely. It's so strange because, that is so much work. There would normally just be a documentary about, the rehearsals, the casting of the musical, who these people are that are, these are legitimate people that were cast in your musical. It's not a put on. It's like, as somebody who heard about the film, I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a cynical look at this thing. And no, it's like these people like are professionals and they're putting their heart into it. They're like treating it like this could take off. This could be a big thing for them.
And you have to care about the ensemble who are named in the film. It's not like they're anonymous, but they're by no means the focus of the musical, nor are the ensemble of a show ever the focus. But you have to, whether you hate musical theater or not, which plenty of people do, and that's fine for them, you have to at least see the earnestness in these kids as something that you can root for.
Yes.
If you're rooting against these little, 23, 24-year-old, just so sincere musical theater nerds who you watch get the part and you watch them train and work and rehearse to get on stage and you're rooting against them.
Right.
You're a very horrible person, I feel. You don't have to love the medium, but you have to at least acknowledge that this is inherently something you can root for. But also, it has to equate with that kind of goofy earnestness that young Malkmus possessed in the archival footage. You have to see him as this dork who clearly just sat in his room listening to 1,000 records and just really wanted to be on stage, even though he was clearly kind of shy about it and wanted to get up there and sing and play. You have to see our musical journey as part and parcel with what that band was from like 1989 to 1995 when they were really just putting the pieces together.
Right. But it's so interesting because the musical, you said, is about earnestness and youth and chance. And then the biopic is about, a fictitious matador, Gerard and Chris speaking to Pavement, being frustrated with them. One of my favorite lines is the label basically telling Pavement, I know you can give the 100% of the 50% that I know that Pavement can give. Writing the biopic, were you taking things from the interview or were you just like being like, this is my fantasy of what this would be like if there were just no boundaries here?
This is a great question and an excellent thing to talk about. The biopic is structured horrifically because it mirrors movies that I don't like. Malkmus says in the film at one point, he's holding up records. He's doing a retrospective interview for Crooked Rain. He says, I'm always inspired by things that sound like shit to me. I don't know why I do that. Like the Eagles with Range Life or classic rock with Silence Kid. And when I saw that years into this process, I was like, that's what I'm doing. I'm inspired by things that look like shit to me. The biopic is structured in the least creative way. Within that cookie cutter, 75% of the dialogue, which obviously in the finished film, we cut around these scenes, we go to some archival. 75% of the dialogue is verbatim. What people said to me, their feelings were at the time, obviously with 25 years of hindsight to muddy what they actually were feeling. It's verbatim from interviews they gave at the time. And you see a couple times in the archival, we cut to somebody saying exactly what their character is saying. The dialogue, which is pitched, it's like, it's pitched and toned in the most cliche way possible, is with very limited exceptions, word for word, what people said, their thoughts were about dealing with, this is what it felt like to be told we're doing Lollapalooza. Malkmus looked at us and he said, it's just another nail in the coffin. Malkmus said, does the tour come to New York? I said, yeah, because I thought he was excited. But then I found out, no, he's embarrassed because he doesn't want to play in front of his friends in a hometown show. Word for word, what's in the movie. If they'd given us Metal Machine music, we'd be in here celebrating. Like word for word. Like this stuff is verbatim. Mark saying, yeah, Lollapalooza, that wasn't really something we were comfortable with. We were always more comfortable like at the Pyramid Club or Maxwell's, word for word. Like, and I just put all that stuff in the movie, but not because I didn't want to write my own dialogue, but because the exercise for me as the writer that they wanted was, how do you take history and distort it so buffoonishly that it becomes palatable to people who go and watch these biopics every 3 or 4 months when we get served a new one from the slop factory. And they watch these scenes and they just believe this is how this famous musician who I love thought and acted in this day where they recorded this song that I love. And they really want to buy into that fantasy. So even though the biopic is deeply ironic and incredibly insincere, because I do not respect that as a medium for serious storytelling at all, it had to be really complex and really sophisticated as an exercise for me in creating a hall of mirrors out of which reality no longer exists, because we have the moment, every biopic has the big concert. Queen at Live Aid, or there's
Sure.
one in the Bob Marley movie. I forget because I only saw it on the back of someone else's seat on an airplane, so I didn't get the sound, but it seems to climax with a concert.
Of course.
The recent Bob Dylan movie climaxes with a concert. And then, so therefore, it was just on the table for me. Lollapalooza, mudslinging, infamous, warrants a mention in the unwatchable recent streaming Lollapalooza documentary. That's how big of a deal it was. So there's our scene. We have to do that. And write worst possible scene full of all these things people said to me. They're going to call you the band that ruined Lollapalooza. When we got started, I thought we would just sell a couple hundred EPs. Everything beyond that has just been gravy to me. These are not things I made up. These are things these people said.
Okay.
But not in that moment. And then what we have is the archival of them changing, laughing.
That's
That's
amazing.
our way of saying, when you see this scene in a movie, and you've seen it before, and you
Yes.
will see it again, you don't actually think this is what happened, do you? You as a viewer are smart enough to see this stuff be served to you with your favorite musicians and celebrities. You're smart enough to know, well, that's not what actually happened. This is a fantasy of how that happened, because they're trying to consolidate a life or a part of a life into 2 hours. So they have to take every single liberty. And I just wanted to do that as a way of feeling out, like, why do they do this? What is this? Why are we doing this?
Right.
Who wants this? Who believes this? Who likes this?
I'd seen in Lance Banks' documentary that footage from Lollapalooza, and I'd written my own myth in it. Like, these guys are broken from this. This is kind of leading them to maybe not even like each other more. You have your fictitious reenactment of it with your actors being hit by mud on screen with Pavement, the situation going on there, and then what they're really feeling like backstage, which is like fine, with the drama of the script that has been written, having this hard drama about like them being really mad at each other. How did you know, like, to put this together? Did you feel like you were ever losing the plot at some point, like with tying it all together?
Well, that's a great example to talk about, because you forgot one thing, which is in the middle of the scene where our actors are being pelted, and we've made the effort to rear project actual footage, which was filmed by Deb Pastor, who Lance worked with and who was with the band at that moment on that tour. We're making it seem like Joe and Nat are in front of the crowd, but then we're also seeing them in a giant room with a green screen, and you can see me filming, and you can see the crew.
Yeah.
And Rob Kolodny, the film's cinematographer, at some point shortly after we shot, Robert was like, why did you film this with the rear projection and the green screen? And I was like, well, the point is that when you see these moments in a movie, the movie wants you to forget you're watching an actor. Otherwise, the whole thing is just ridiculous. You need to believe that you're actually watching Stephen Malkmus get mud thrown at him. What I want to do is cut between Deb's footage, Joe, and then like the way we're filming it, as a way of just saying, like, the best moment in these movies that they just want you to be levitating out of your seat. It's just a bunch of fucking actors standing around in a soundstage. Like, this is not real. They're not playing in front of 10,000 or 50,000 or 2,000 fans. They're just walking out of hair and makeup. They're getting the mud touched up. It's just fake on top of fake on top of fake. And I thought that was interesting as a way of collapsing fact and fiction. of a way of collapsing myth and reality, because to me, that was the spirit of the band. It was the spirit of their art. It was the spirit of the montage feel of their music. It was the feeling of the collage feel of Malkmus's artwork on those albums. And to do anything less than two layers too many. A band with two percussionists. So just add something else. Just add the other thing. It just felt like it was a given that this was the way to deconstruct not even the format of these biopics, but literally the scenes in them and the way that they are reconstructed and sold to us. Of we have to get the wardrobe just right with the white stripes on Malkmus's green shirt. And it pains me that we had to make that shirt. That shirt is made to look exactly like it. And our seamstress is sitting there meticulously sewing each white stripe on so it looks exactly the same. And I just was thinking, man, I wish we were filming this. This is powerful stuff. And we didn't get it. And the movie just had to be all of that. It had to be just a little bit of that. It had to be, to me, what Pavement are to music, what this is to movies, which is it's kind of doing exactly the same thing as a lot of stuff that's coming out at the same time. It's just like 50% smarter, 90% more clever, and deeply above it all, while also playing the game exactly as much as we feel like. Because that's how I perceive what the band was doing at that time.
That's so funny, because the last question I was going to ask you was, on a scale of 100% of the 50% Pavement can give, what percentage of a percentage do you give this film? And you just did it, so
yeah.
I don't have to ask that anymore.
I made
it's true.
5 meals at 100%. But that's the funny thing, is I'm losing track of reality working on this thing, and I'm doing this all in the service of one of Gen X's finest slacker icons. However, I'm working hard, pulling together a musical, a biopic, all this. Malkmus's attitude the whole time is like, oh yeah, like, thanks. The museum was fun. And I'm like, great. I worked on that for 9 months. But like,
yes.
But then ultimately, the closer I got to the end of the process and talking to him and listening to him, he's a perfectionist. He's a contradiction, because he seems like a slacker, and he is, I guess, in many ways an iconic slacker. But he's meticulous. He's a perfectionist. He doesn't rest until something is perfect by whatever his own standards are. Not perfect, like what's the band The Laws, the one that like the guy could never make another album because he's too much of a perfectionist.
Yes.
That's not Malkmus. What he is, and Chris Lombardi at one point said a perfect thing to me that not only did it crack the character, but it changed my life. He said, Malkmus's ideal way of finishing a project is saying, it turned out pretty good, and I didn't even have to work very hard on it. And because I said, did he have, could he ever have made that album, the album that was just diamond cut? He worked on it for 2 years. Every song is a hit. It's just a perfect take you to the stratosphere album. And everyone said, of course he could have, easily. But he would have had to have really dug in on one thing for longer than he ever would. And he just doesn't work like that. He wants to not have to work that hard at it, give it 50%. But Malkmus's 50% is not my 50%. It's not most musicians' 50%. Right. Don't confuse the fact that guy seems like he's kind of slacking, and therefore that's correct. He can underdo it and still achieve higher levels of excellence than most other people. And that's really fascinating. And ultimately what we were told at the end of the day is like, he respects people who work hard. Right. And you guys have worked really hard on this. And that's what he wanted. It's not that he had a vision for the movie. It's not that he has notes. He just needed people to want to work hard. He doesn't like people who don't work hard. Oh, but it seems like he's not working hard. Well, he is, but he doesn't need to.
Well, yeah, and this film is like you sequencing an album, because there's so many elements to it. And I'm sure it changed over the years you were making it, like how you wanted to tell it. But how did you know when it was done?
I'm sure Robert talked about this. He edited the movie consistently for 1.5 years. Um, it just kept getting shorter, and then the movie was invited to premiere at Venice, and we were done. Like, we would have kept working on it, even though it would have driven Robert insane.
Right.
But there's only so much you can do. Like, ultimately you have to look to Malkmus and be like, yeah, I probably could have cut 3 or 4 songs off of that album, but I don't know. So it's like, yeah, we probably could have kept working and cut 10 or 15 more minutes out, but like, I don't know, like, ultimately I'm going to have to look to the star. And it just, yeah, I don't know. It's just a feeling like, I don't know how he knew when things were done. Never scrutinized it. That's not the level of probing insight I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, we're insane now. We've been driven insane by this process. Everybody wants this to be finished, and it has an extremely prestigious and urgent premiere offered to it that is the kind of thing out of reach for every run-of-the-mill music documentary. No streaming music documentary has ever or will ever premiere in competition at Venice or Cannes or Berlin or any major film festival. We had that. And we had done it with a band whose legacy is a fraction of what the kind of artists who do get that platform were given. And we were recognized by, the film festival and then, others, New York Film Festival, as having made something radically unique and groundbreaking, which is to say, copying the spirit of Pavement, but in a parallel medium.
Right.
You're saying like somebody who watches, like, we're all junkies for these things. Like, you probably will fire up any documentary about any musician you're even passingly interested in.
Yeah. Well, my show it's Revolution for Movie. All we do is my guests come on and talk about their favorite music film. That's what the show is. And here I am 162 episodes in, and nobody has done any Beatles film. No one's done Song Remains the Same. They're all like, I want to talk about Jan Duck on Corwood. I want to talk about jazz on a summer's day.
I'm a junkie for these things. We watch them all the time at Kim's because they go down smooth. We just had to make something that the biggest encyclopedic nerd for I watch every music film was like, well, I've never seen one like that before.
Yes.
Or I've seen one like that before, but it's the whole movie. But in this movie, it's a fifth of the film.
Right.
That was the challenge. It was simply make 5 movies in one and make it all at the same time and try not to go insane.
Yeah. And now there'll be like, in the next 50 years, there'll be another 800 films that will be based on the style of this film. And then people will be like, man, I'm tired of this kaleidoscopic psychedelic thing.
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, the thing is, like, I've been asked by people, yeah, I'm working on something very early days, another thing with the band. And someone's like, will it be like Pavements? And I was like, no, because while our goal was avoid the cookie cutter, which was Malkmus's exact words, let's say that we did make a cookie cutter. I would watch this exact format of movie about anybody. It would not make any sense for anyone else other than Pavement and maybe 2 or 3 other artists. But those other artists are the ones that inspire, like, this exact format of movie would make sense for David Bowie. But that's only because my entire idea with this was, what if Pavement were on that level where there's been 15 credible films made about them?
Yes.
And I re-edited all of them into one movie. So yes, you could do that with David Bowie. You could do that with the Rolling Stones. I would watch a 2-hour edit of every single David Bowie movie. That would be a dazzling formal experiment. No one will do that unless they just do it for fun. So for me, I was like, let's just presume they're on that level. Let's make that the thing, because there's only going to be this movie. Like, this is not the one until 3 years from now they make another one. So we have to do them all. We have to do it all now.
Right.
And that was the challenge.
Amazing. Alex, congratulations on everything. And I'll put a link in here where people can see it because it's coming out. It's coming out nationwide in May. So
yes, throughout May and June, and then Mubi streaming July at some point, and in perpetuity. So thanks.
Brilliant. Yeah, really nice to meet you.
Well, we'll talk video stores next time.
Yeah, because you'll probably be like, I remember selling that to you at some point. We'll just hit the thing. Yeah. We'll be like, I remember, you're the one who bought this.
Sure. I did manage the sales floor ultimately. So it's entirely likely.
Thanks again, Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app, and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show's a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!